Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Daily AI Show. You know, every once in a while, something drops that causes you to say, let's really try to understand from the 70,000 foot level what's really happening in our world of AI. And that just happened in the last several days. There's a woman, Mary Meeker, who is known formerly as the Queen of the Internet and is now going to become the Queen of AI. We're going to tell you all about it on today's show. And today is June 3rd, 2025. And we're getting a very high level perspective on what's really going on from somebody who has established herself as the seer of things, internet and AI. And now we have the pleasure of analyzing that. Joining me today is Beth Lyons and Junmi Hatcher. I'm Andy Halliday. And let me just give you a bit of a summary of who Mary Meeker was. Mary Meeker, and she still is. And she's given us something very interesting and deep. A 305-page extensive analysis of what is really happening on the ground and in the skies of Skynet. And so we have a lot to talk about today. So here's a blurb about Mary Meeker from Nate Jones, who did a very excellent summary of this 305-page report, so you wouldn't have to. And we're going to digest that even further today so that you don't have to even read Nate's long report, which I just read this morning. He published it just today. Okay. Mary Meeker this is quoting Nate Jones now, Mary Meeker has always been the internet's best pilot at 30,000 feet. And this year's deck is another masterclass in macro vision. Her slides prove three things beyond argument. Compute is compounding faster than anyone predicted. Capital is willing to chase that curve indefinitely. And consumers are already dipping 1 billion fingertips into the interface. And all of this has happened at lightning speed. We're going to have to define a new one at AI speed because, when you look back to the advent of the internet and ultimately what Google did to kind of aggregate a lot of that attention from the multiple players who first entered into the internet space and offered portals and search engines and millions of web pages for you to peruse through your browser, which was a new thing when Netscape kind of came onto the scene back in the mid-1990s. It took years and years to achieve that level. But now the internet is there and there's billions of people who are already connected, and AI has leveraged that infrastructure to become something profoundly huge in a very short period of time. We're talking about 25, 26 months since this hit the ground. So here, Mary Meeker, came to prominence at Morgan Stanley, where she first started publishing in the 90s about the internet. And that became a really essential reading for everybody during the dot-com boom. And then she became a partner at Kleiner Perkins, one of the most venerable of the venture capital firms. And she was there while they backed industry-defining companies like Airbnb, Spotify, Pinterest. And then she formed her own venture capital firm in 2018. And but what makes her so notable, and our colleague Carl was saying, back when I was working, in the internet space, I read her report every year. They were amazingly comprehensive, and she leveraged her experience as an analyst in the financial marketplace for high technology to establish herself really as the speaker on that. I've seen her speak at major internet conferences before, but I digress. So she's got a very great reputation, and she's now come out, and now people are going to be expecting to see her report at this level of comprehension and detail on an ongoing basis. So she's back on the scene, and we get to read what she said about the internet. So here's a quick summary. The first point: unprecedented growth and adoption, including specific examples she makes, because there's this open question about, oh, yeah, lots of people are dabbling in it, but when you do the surveys, not that high a percentage of people inside companies are really using it in effective ways, or despite the fact that ChatGPT is being used in a superficial way by billions of people on the planet, uh, it's really not found its way meaningfully into workflows and so on. And she provides strong counterpoints to that, pointing specifically to some things like at Kaiser Permanente, now over 10,000 doctors use the medical scribe assistant to automatically document patient visits. 10,000 in that one Kaiser Permanente healthcare system. She shows that 27%, almost a third of ride hailing trips in San Francisco are now handled by autonomous vehicles, Waymo principally. And then in the United States in healthcare, excuse me, the FDA has approved 223 AI-powered medical devices in 2023 and more in 2024. If you go back just a decade, they approved 5 devices that used information technology, as part of medical devices back then. So AI, she says, is quickly moving from demonstrations to deployment. Doctors, drivers, and many others are already working alongside AI, and that trend is accelerating. Okay, so AI, we all know, has experienced exponential growth in users and usage and investment. So developers have been leading the way. And one of the statistics that's in this report is that 63% of developers, we mean people who are coding and writing, product requirements, documents, and so on, 63% globally now use AI, up from 44% just a year ago. And this, by the way, this is the title of this report is making reference to this is second quarter 2025. So a lot of her references to prior year are really about a year ago, 2024, in the second quarter. So halfway through the 2025 year and looking backward 1 year and so on. Okay, here's an interesting statistic that comes from this to support the incredible rapid adoption of this thing. Google processes 480 trillion tokens monthly, which is 50 times year over year, 50x tokens processed. And when they say tokens processed, they're not talking about all data center operations, which Google had the lion's share of in the first place. They're talking about AI tokens in inference processing. And then to put it into context of the major competitors out there who are doing the processing of AI, Microsoft does, compared to the 480 trillion tokens that Google does only 100 trillion tokens quarterly. Google does 5 times that monthly. Okay, so call it 15 times the pace of Microsoft. And yet Microsoft is a major provider of internet and AI infra. So that's that kind of thing. And then we've all talked about the incredible investments that are being made by the major players in AI. And most of that is going to chips and data centers. Why? Because there's increasing and rapidly growing demand for that inference processing. People are building internet infrastructure, building on internet infrastructure and compounding advances in compute and in algorithms and hardware. Okay, now I've talked quite a bit here just about the incredible growth that's going on here. Let me just jump ahead to some takeaways, because we're then going to talk over the course of the next 30, 45 minutes about each of the areas that she addresses in this 305-page report. But I want to just kind of skip ahead to the takeaways that are major takeaways from this. So the first one is that there's an attitude in this overall report about the importance of this incredible volume of growth and activity, and emphasizes speed over caution. There's a big argument about whether we should slow down. Hey, whoa, this has huge societal implications. And, there are possible misalignment threats. So maybe we should slow down. Her take is far more optimistic and says speed and evidences an attitude of speed over caution. She gives an example that OpenAI's willingness to launch an imperfect and hallucinating product in AI was a practical gamble that really paid off. Think about the incredible number of users of that 800 million weekly active users right now. 800 million active weekly. That's ChatGPT's big payoff in the bet that they put out something that she says the large incumbents like Google couldn't have done because it would damage their reputation too much to put out a product that hallucinated. Not to mention that some of their products did go out nonetheless early and, were embarrassing at the outset. But all that's kind of washing away. Now, the speed over caution point is there's scant mention of AI's societal downsides here in this report. It's mostly an enthusiastic and optimistic approach to that whole thing. She notes also that in this investment and growth, there's widespread development. It's not concentrated in Silicon Valley. It's happening across the world. And of course, China is demonstrating significant capabilities. And this is leading to not just a concentration in one country that is then providing services to the rest of the world, but rather multiple players out there rapidly adopting and imitating the capabilities of the leading, progressive foundation model builders, and then adding on to those things with incredible capabilities. So widespread development. And then she's very optimistic overall in this report about the impact on learning and education. There are still nonetheless institutions where you're not allowed to use AI, and professors and or teachers in high schools object to the identification and they have means of identifying it with tools and or just obvious, in reading the report that you wrote, that it was done with AI, and there's a lot of pushback on that sort of thing. And instead of echoing those anxieties, Mary Meeker says, cheating and misinformation, that's a distraction. She strikes an optimistic tone. She says, we have likely reached a generational, fast and furious change across education, and this should be the best of times in learning.
Yeah, can we dive? I don't know if you've got more, Andy, but can we, like, for the summary? But I definitely want to dive in more to the educational side.
Let's go there because that's kind of the end of my opening rant, shall we say?
The education. Look, I think Nate Jones did a great job with his Substack summary, which a multi-page summary of a 320-page report. But also, let's not forget bondcap.com. Mary's, I think it's their VC firm that she had launched, also put out a sub report on AI and education, which has some summaries from the larger report, but really does dive in a little bit deeper. And the name of that report, and Beth, I can get you the link to put out to everybody. It's called AI in Universities. It's from Bond, and it was put out July 1st. So also 2 days ago. So I think in line with the larger report. And there's a couple of key things here that I think that she points out that I think are really, really important. Number one, I'm going to give you some of my opinion on this, and then I'd love to hear you guys too, because I know you guys know I get excited about the education side, so I'll try to keep this succinct so I don't just ramble on. But these are the best of times if universities, high school, middle school if they get on board and understand what the true potential here is. We've talked on this show many, many times about the idea of ever-present tutors, the idea that we might be able to help kids who are outside the fringes. They do not fit in the typical, box of what education is. And how many times have we talked or listened to very prominent adults who have risen to high levels, maybe even president or otherwise, heads of large corporations, who said, I was awful in school. I couldn't do this. I think I was dyslexic, but back in the day, that wasn't identified. I grew up in the 50s or whatever the case is. Nobody was talking about that. Nobody was talking about, anxiety or how bullying was affecting kids and all these different variables that get out there. And what we realize is that there's so many different ways that children are able to learn and are perfectly capable of learning and consuming education and information, and then being able to use that for their life. But it doesn't fit neatly in a box. But we've only really ever had a system where it said, okay, take the mean, take the median, put them in a classroom. The teacher does do their best with limited resources. The teacher is up against the wall the whole time, so they don't have what they need. The school doesn't have the funding in many cases. We have this huge problem, and I'm just talking about the American education system. I can't even speak to, there's a lot of places around the world that I am sure are doing this better, but I only know the American system. So now I look at AI and I look what Mary's talking about, and she's saying, look, when it gets, and she's specifically talking about university, so post high school, but she's saying students are going to be voting with their paychecks, their pocketbooks, their money, right? And universities are going to have to respond to that. They're going to have to finally start showing some ROI. Far too long to me that our universities have basically been able to give a wishy-washy answer of what this is going to do for the absurd amount of money it costs for your child to now go and get an education. And we know lots of children do that unknowing what they're getting on the back end of it, and they're doing it with a lot of student debt. And so what she is saying is, look, universities better get on board. They better figure out how to make AI part of this, because as we said to our class of 2025, what was that, 2 weeks ago now, on a Monday, when we were talking about like our thoughts for the class of 2025, we know that this is going to change rapidly, even in the last 4 years, but never mind freshmen who are incoming now in the fall and what they're going to see in 4 years when they potentially graduate. Again, assuming a typical 4-year education. But I love that what she's saying is, like, universities are going to face a choice: leverage AI to expand reach, partner with industry for compute and data, and double down on signature programs, or risk losing relevance and revenue. Mary offers a checklist that covers ROI, research velocity, teacher quality, and industry links. And I think this is a big point. A lot of what I saw in the report and what Nate suggested on, I felt was, yep, that's obvious to me. To me, I felt like, yep, this is just reconfirming what I already feel. But I did love that she took the time to put the information into education, because I just don't think a lot of people are paying as much attention to how that's going to rapidly change. And if you've got students, if you've got children that are getting close to that university age, this is something you need to be paying more attention to probably to anything else, because it could directly affect how your child is able to have a job and hold a job in the future. It's huge.
Excellent points. It reminds me that while we have heard plenty of news stories about the negative consequences of hallucination in AI generated content in education, about the misinformation that results, and importantly around cheating or missing the opportunity to actually generate something yourself by interacting with AI. Simultaneously, we see incredible results from the Harvard study and from some studies abroad, where just implementing the simple accessibility of an AI tutor, something to actually interact with conversationally, dramatically accelerates the learning and the retention for students. So there's huge benefits to come from the incorporation of AI in education.
100%.
But slight pushback here, because those are headline statements. It hugely accelerates and also decelerates depending on how you're using it. Education is based on an experience of struggle, of synthesis, those kinds of things. AI by nature in these contexts wants to be helpful, right? Will you help me? Will you just tell me what the thing is? AI will generally be delighted to help you, and that is robbing you of your education. So while we're talking about this, I just want to be
I,
clear
I
that
disagree.
there are places. Uh, uh, okay.
I disagree because here's what I'd say to that, Beth. That is true if you use ChatGPT in as it is to be helpful to just answer questions. What I would push back against is yes, if your intent is to shoehorn AI into the current education system, it's going to prove the wrong things. It's just going to help people get to answers faster. There won't be synthesis. There won't be doing projects and real life based things. I agree with you that AI can shortchange that experience. But what I would push back to say is, yeah, we definitely should not be figuring out how to just throw AI on top of education as if it was a calculator. That's not the answer here because that just does shortchange and doesn't give them the experience. But why don't we just look like the way it was in co-intelligence, the way Ethan Malik talks about it, which is, hey, I think this entire thing needs to flip. And if you're walking into a classroom, it should be about experiences, not what AI can shortchange and give you the answer to. You have time at home to use O3 to do deep research, to come up with new novel ideas. When you get in the classroom, now is the time to apply this. And that does require quite a bit of a swap of the way things are done today, where it's come into class, the teacher will tell you what you need to know. You do rote memorization, figure out how to pass the test, and yada yada, you get an A. Hey, great, you're ready for life. You got lots of A's, and we know that doesn't work.
That
So
is
I understand what
literally
you're
the
saying. I
nuance.
just think there's a swap here that
You
needs to
don't
happen.
disagree with me. That is literally the nuance that I'm talking about, right? It depends how you apply it.
Well, you were saying, I guess you're saying it's going to, okay, fair enough. You were saying it's going to slow it down if it's applied currently without changing the education structure. If
Everyone
it's
can get a
applied, it would
better
slow down.
everyone can get a better education if you just give them an AI tutor. That is not enough. That is not a sufficient statement for how to get a better education with an AI tutor. That's my point. This is a
Okay.
nuanced
So
discussion.
I want to correct your phrasing. Yes, what you said is true. If getting a better education is as simple as providing an AI tutor, that I think we could argue against and dismiss. But I don't think you can dismiss the point that's created by the actual research and experimentation that shows that simply providing, not changing the classroom structure, none of those changes, just adding the availability of an AI tutor to explore and interact with the student in a way that isn't possible on their own because they don't have a live human tutor to do it. That one-to-one interaction dramatically improves their learning. And they have ways of assessing what they actually learned and how long they can retain it. That happens just by bolting on an AI tutor to a class that's otherwise, and they do this in a scientific method, right, where they have organized groups in effect that some of them do this particular module without an AI tutor, others do it with the tutor, and they have cross cohort comparisons of those things. And the people who had just let them have access to a tutor, and it's basically Chat GPT on with training on the subject, that advances their capability, their learning, their knowledge. All of those things are improved and in significant ways. So I'm making that point in order to counter the idea that it's not enough to provide a tutor, which is underlying your point. But I do get that that's not the end all and be all of the AI improvements that I think Mary Meeker is anticipating that will transform the educational systems.
Okay.
I would say
So I'm going to say one other thing, and then we don't have to have this show does not need to become Beth, Andy, and Brian all argue about education because there's lots of other takeaways. I think that part of
excuse
what
me.
we're talking about is is acquiring skill and wisdom and applied context. And I am also referring to research done with scientific method, right? There is some nuance in the transfer of learning to being able to be applied. And I'm not sure that we're talking about like across the board what sort of, when they were given the tutor, what was the situation. And these people were not given the tutor. They're all at Harvard, so they all probably have some kind of learning process that they engage in, right? So there's just nuance. I think we have a ton of people who listen to the show. I just want to be clear that, like, cool, pay for your kid to get a $20 subscription and like go be you, be everything that you can be.
Oh, well,
That is
okay.
not something that we're seeing, right? That is
Yes.
not.
Yeah, I agree with that, Beth. I think a solid point. I think what I would say is, I know I get passionate about this too when it comes to education. Clearly, I said that at the beginning. What I would say is this: equity is my biggest fear, not what AI can do or not do. It's equity across the board. What I really fear is that there are going to be universities who figure this out. They are going to be universities who decide that they want to have ROI and they want to prove it. They're going to come to parents like me. I have a 14-year-old. She's not ready for college yet, but she will be. So in the next 4 years, these are going to be pretty critical. Let's even say the next 2-3 years, once she starts getting to PSAT and SATs. Again, United States rules here. But what if I had a university that said, hey, Brian, we would love to have your daughter. We'd like to bring her on a partial scholarship or whatever, or not. We just would love to have, daughter here. This is what it costs. We don't have AI figured out, but this is what we think is going to best get your daughter ready for the future based on what we currently know. We're going to be switching a few things up. Now we're going to be doing this where we used to do that. Your daughter is going to get an AI tutor. This is the best of what we have right now. This is how we're going to help it. I think all of that is going to happen. My biggest fear is that, Beth, they're coming to me or people who have means, and the people who don't or already are struggling to be able to get those educations are going to be left on the side. And what you're going to have is even more haves and have-nots. I actually think AI is going to help lots of kids get in and do the right thing and be prepared. How they get there, who it touches, is it equitable across all levels and all income levels and people who don't typically have access? That is my biggest fear. No different than the internet. That's my biggest fear.
And
if you don't have a reliable, fast internet connection, how do you have AI right now?
We're in agreement.
Yeah, I know we are. Yeah.
Okay, to bring us back to the main thread, thank you very much for that very interesting analysis of the optimistic versus, cautious approaches to integration of AI into education. So, again, one of the key takeaways of the Mary Meeker report is that AI's trajectory, as observed in all of these data, says that it will be fundamental, pervasive infrastructure, just like the internet is today, but now augmented with AI, profoundly altering how individuals and organizations interact with technology and the world. And we've just discussed some major changes that are going to probably happen as a result of this integration of this infrastructure into institutions of higher learning. Okay, so now, what are some of the other areas where some data kind of piqued your interest that was included in this report? Because there's got to be 10 different categories of major assertions that come about with supporting evidence in this report. So, Junmi, what have you got? What one thing stood out to you in your research on this report?
That it's over 300 pages. There is a lot to chew on here, and I will fully admit I have not been able to read all 340 pages. So I've done my perplexities, I've done my Nate Jones summaries, and all of that. I think the primary takeaways we've covered initially, job market transformation, AI related IT jobs have gone up 448% job postings, right? Whereas all other non-AI jobs is down 9%. So this goes to show like levels of impact. Like Andy, you've already talked about like 63% adoption in enterprise and things like that. And obviously the education piece is, you know, a hot button subject. But I think holistically, when we're looking at everything here, it is that up and to the right. That's what gets mentioned often, right? Everything on every chart is, you know, up and to the right. So, I think my takeaway here, or what piqued my interest, is this is one, a confirmation of the bubble we already live in, right? We all recognize, everyone who watches the show, joins us in chat, what we talk about, we know this is a transformative technology. It's going to hit every single industry, every single sector, and it all seems to be going in the direction that we've been predicting, or what we think. So there's a lot of vindication, validation kind of stuff going on there. But so I guess beyond that, that's my biggest take. Now, what are the kind of things that we can draw from it to inform us of what's coming up, right? So there's some in there into the report about what we're going to see in the future, and that's some of the calls that I find interesting as well. So like 2030 seems to be another big mile marker. So 5 years from now, right? Mary seeing things like, you know, where we will be in terms of adoption. Pretty much everything will have AI in it. Every device that we use, every touch point that we have. And the other interesting takeaway is the assessment that we will be closer to, but not an actual call of when we have achieved AGI. But that's looking for 2035, which, if we're looking at what we're seeing in the, you know, people making statements from, you know, people who are high up in these AI directed organizations are all saying things like, oh, maybe 2027, right? Maybe just a couple of years down the line. And these kinds of predictions. And we know that you got to take a grain of salt with each of these, because they live in their own bubbles, and they're in a more unique position to see what they think their product or their influence is going to reach there. But I found that the call for 2035 is pretty far out there compared to what everybody else is. Andy, were you saying something? I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wanted to just put into perspective this idea of, 5 years from now. The pace of advancement in AI is accelerating, not slowing down.
Right.
And think back to what ChatGPT was with GPT-3 and GPT 3.5 in November of 2022 and December and then January, and then where we are today with agents like GenSpark, Manus, and Flowwith. That's the expression of the highest order of combination capabilities in AI, and how distinctly advanced that is, and how much faster and cheaper it is today, just 2+ years later. And we're talking about twice that time between now and 2030, and all of the things that can happen with major advances that are happening every week. We hear a new way of advancing beyond the transformer, or tweaking the transformer in certain ways to make it more capable of reasoning with greater memory and greater context. Things are going to be, I think, the only term that comes up in my mind is astoundingly different by 2030. I can't even imagine what it's going to be like in 2030.
Andy, as we know, like, what we know publicly is always already out of date. By the time it becomes considered publicly safe, depending on the client, the company, and whether it's Anthropic or others or whatever. But all you have to do is listen to what Dario is out there saying, the CEO of Anthropic, or others. There was a great one from the CEO, I can't think of his name, of Microsoft, and others, right? Not just them. that are out here saying like, oh, this is what we think is coming. Well, they're not trying to give away what they have, but let's just be honest. Whatever GPT-5 is, whatever that is, by a different name, by a different whatever, this all-in-one tool that they've sort of said, Sam and others have said is coming, that exists. And so does maybe the next thing after that in some raw form. And whatever O3 can do today and its ability to go backwards, Carl, you talked about how O3 is building a deeper moat for you because you can now go back to previous, and it's the memory thing that is bringing you in. Whatever that is today is just a glimpse at where this is going in the future, and a lot of that future has already been written. So when people predict out to 2030, I go, based on what? The only person I want to hear somebody say, like, based on a 2027 or predicting, are the people who have the inside baseball knowledge, who are the ones who already know what the next 2 or 3 iterations are that we're not knowledgeable about. I'm all for people making predictions. We make predictions on the show all the time, but man, does 2030, never mind 2035, sound like an absurd amount of time based on what you just laid out, Andy. And by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Matt Wolf, who put out a recent video, maybe in the last week, called The History of AI. Highly recommend going to look at that. It's a level up for him. He has an editor in there that's really putting together some cool stuff for him. I'm really, really excited, and I love following Matt Wolf on YouTube. I highly recommend it for other people. But he has a history of AI that goes all the way back to Turing and the Turing test and where we are all the way up to what we currently know today. So just wanted to give a quick shout out for that as well.
Nice. Carl, give us some wisdom here.
I was actually listening to the AI Daily Brief this morning, and he was talking about how there's a couple things that this report doesn't shine light on, and I think it's more of because this report's trying to catch up. I remember in digital marketing or digital anything, Mary Meeker is one. It was sad that she stopped doing this around 2019 because you always look forward to the reports, and you always took the charts and graphs from everything. Every year there was something really neat, and you can showcase that to your executives or whoever and say, hey, see, this is what we're supposed to be doing, and it gives it more gravitas because somebody else said it versus you. I think the couple of things that I think like a lot of this is catch up because there's not very much anything here talking about agents or orchestration layers, or what I know we have a show on Thursday about like agentic web, right? How agents are like you talked about Manus, GenSpark, and so on, being able to do things for you. Like I'm even using the new GenSpark ability to download PDFs for you. So the new feature is to go out, find PDFs or links or videos, download them, put them into a folder, and then you can do something else with that folder, which I thought was really neat because that's just another step in agents being able to do something for you. So that's one part. I also there's very little on copyright. There's very little on governance and safety. There was like, I think a high level bullet point. And I think the big part is AI safety and governance, because going back to the Dario Amodei, where that was covered, everyone's talking about, hey, you know what, the government, like essentially governments need to be involved more than how they are today. And, what are the checkpoints? What are the red teams? Because in the big, beautiful bill, isn't there something that's like pause regulation or something? I could be wrong. Isn't there a pause regulation for like 10 years?
10-year pause on any regulation at the state level.
Yeah. So I have a feeling that will pass. Like, I don't think if you're able to fire the head of the copyright office whenever a report you disagree with, I feel that will pass. So which means, what does that mean from a governance perspective and safety? So there's that missing, I think. And then also examples were large language models, image models, but I think like video and audio was barely touched on. And I think that's even more important. especially the audio side, where it's such an undervalued um, um, like use. So, for example, yesterday, after our game, I played our teammates. One of my teammates, he's a police officer, and I was just showing him the tool Whisper Flow, and the ability for him to do his reports without typing. It's like, my God, I can save how many hours I can just do that. And then being able to take witness testimonies, or let's say in a scene or an accident or whatever, instead of you just writing all this down or taking notes, and like people are in a panic, or they're something bad just happened to them and they're just talking a mile a minute. All the person now has to do is just sit there and just record without taking notes in whatever language, and they can take that, and six of them, like, because there's usually six officers at a whatever scene, if they can take all the reports, put that together using just voice and audio, the implications of that for that team, for that scene is so much greater. So I think that's what's a little bit missing too. So some of that, like, I was just looking at, like, what are some things that we know are coming very quickly that this report didn't have, which I thought it was trying to catch up to the last 3 years, that it'd probably be 600 slides if it included some of those things. And the last piece is the environmental footprint too, like that piece, right? And what is the environmental impact of all these new things, like the inference costs and the data centers becoming. So some of that has been missed too, but you can't put everything in the report.
Well, that's a good point, because I mean, this is definitely from the context of who's making it, right? This is from a VC term, so or group. So their viewpoint or their perspective is the majority of what was covered was to show, hey, business leaders, other companies, these are the kinds of trends that you're going to see in this world, right? And I said there is a couple of things that I would highlight is a good takeaway from or what they suggest are next steps. And that's essentially like their 3 horizons framework. I thought that was a good takeaway if you're looking for applied strategy for your own business, or to expect what you might expect from businesses to take away and how they apply that. And so it's broken down into the short-term, mid-term, and long-term framework, right? So on the short term, Mary suggests integration of AI into existing products and workflows. I think we can all agree that that is happening, right? To quickly start adopting, if you aren't already adopting AI. In the midterm, they call for expansion into AI native products and services. So if you aren't already building new products, or your product doesn't have an AI native approach, that's something to look at for your midterm goals. And finally, the long-term goals is making bets on transformative technologies, including AGI, right? This is high risk, high reward research and development, and those kinds of things that are long-term plays. So these are all things I think we've already recognized these companies are starting to do, especially the long term. AI seems to be a long-term play for large investment. We're seeing over 200 billion invested in the last couple of years. So I think these are takeaways that we will just see further drilled in for companies that may have been sitting on the fence, right? Because we've talked about that wait equation that you have to. So should I wait 6 months and then wait for a solution there, or should I start doing something now? And so this kind of calls along that line. And I do want to point out there is some clear positioning on AI by the report. Is the clear position is recognizing AI as a pivotal or transformative piece, right? There are slides in there that are just talking about, look, we had the printing press, we've got the internet, and now we've got AI, and these are all that level of significance. And so moving forward from there, this does kind of speak to what Carl was saying is a little bit of catch up, but these are the kinds of reports that anyone who doesn't know anything about AI or isn't living AI as it evolves, and who are leaders in various organizations, various companies of various sizes, and are just looking for the thing that's going to prove it to them. I think that's the main purpose or takeaway we can get from this report is, yes, move forward. Here are some instructions and strategy to work with.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to speak to Carl's point about agents. I think there was something in the report about that being the next phase, the rise of AI agents and shifting the interface for humans from messaging to action. So like there's this transition from I'm asking a question or in the most rudimentary form, I'm doing a Google search type query and giving it to an AI for its AI generated response. That's messaging, but we're going to soon find our way to giving compute with action capability instructions. Like, here's what I want you to do. And it's going to do something rather than just tell you about it. So that transition, I think, is referenced in the paper. I'm not sure exactly where. I, like many of us, did not read 305 pages of the report. Instead, leaned on Nate's summary and also Notebook LM, ultimately generating a podcast type exchange, grabbing the transcript of that and having ChatGPT do a summary of that. So there's lots of ways to digest these things quickly when you hear about them 2 days ago, and then you're going to do a show about them. So there's a lot of AI behind the scenes here helping us give you an overview of this incredibly deep research, which I believe, and the report itself must have, given her optimistic and AI forward views, it included lots of AI in the collection of the data and the generation of these reports. I wanted to,
yeah,
go
let me
ahead,
just
Beth.
jump in there because one of the like so important pieces of this is that this is data based, right? So a lot of what we have been saying is we see the trends, it makes sense. We're seeing small reports, but this is like a vast window into everything, but it's like chock full of data. Right. So it's not, I have a gut feeling this is happening. No, we're seeing this. We're seeing a pattern. These are the calculations. This is where the research came from. And that just grounds the conversation so fully.
I think it really helps too for companies who are thinking, oh, this isn't happening maybe at the pace. I mean, look, we're in the bubble, right? So I kind of read that. I read Nate's summary of the report, which he did a phenomenal job. We didn't really dive in today, but where he differs with Mary, which I thought was really interesting. And at the bottom, he also gives other publications like Axios and TechCrunch and stuff, and what they thought of her report as well, which was super helpful. But Andy, it's like we're in like a microcosm of this, right? Like, one of the biggest issue is when electricity became a thing and people could have lights on, there's this super slow transition for humans. We still have the same brains, evolutionarily speaking, for how we're able to process this type of change. And so you can say, well, I live on the outskirts of the one town, and they have electricity, and it'll be 2 years before it reaches me. And I can see it coming, and I can adjust my life and all that. And then we went through all the other things. And then even with the internet, there was time to adjust to that. Lots of people, I remember working with people who say, I like doing it the old way. I don't really like the internet. I don't need to do that. It's too slow. It's whatever. I'm faster than that. And what I think we're seeing today, I know we're seeing is we see reports like this who, to your point, Beth, put the data on it and say, no, this isn't speculation. This isn't a whole bunch of people hyping this up. It's happening, and it's probably happening faster over the last 2 years than you even thought it was happening. Like, it's exponential growth. Axios or TechCrunch, I think it's TechCrunch, pointed out, sorry, I'm just going to make sure I say the right one. TechCrunch pointed out that Meeker said the word unprecedented on 51 slides out of 320. Right. Unprecedented. So but we shouldn't just roll over that word. Unprecedented, meaning there's nothing before that we can lean on to help us understand the pace at which we need to move. And so for companies or anybody else who hopefully are going to consume this report, I'm going to send this report on to my dad, actually. I think he'll really, really enjoy it. Maybe not the 321 page one, but maybe Nate's Substack on it, because my dad and I were just having a conversation. Now, he's retired. It isn't something he's necessarily focusing on a ton on, but he is interested and curious about AI. But even for him, he was like, I don't quite understand where it is today and where it's going. And so I think a report like this is going to be hugely helpful to people. But Carl, I think you made the best point, honestly, which is, hey, this doesn't really look forward. This catches us up for what's happened up to this point. Still very, very helpful. But I hadn't really thought about that until you said it, Carl. So I think that's a solid point, which is, hey, but it doesn't look forward. And maybe that's coming. Maybe that's not what she's necessarily going to do. Maybe because she does now run a VC firm, Jumi, that's not really where her motive is for writing this report. But she must have had some motive, because she hadn't put anything out like this since 2019. And now she's back. So it'll be interesting to see, is this going to be like a biannual type deal? Is it going to be like A16, right? Z? Is it going to be like now they're doing it quarterly because they have to? These kind of things. It'd be really interesting to see where she goes with the reports after this. And do they start looking forward or not?
Yeah, I wanted to point out that, to Beth's commendation on the data that grounds this report, that if you look at the actual PDF of the report, it's mostly graphic, right? You're not going to be reading long text passages. There's graph after graph after graph, which is the visual summary of an enormous amount of data. And each one of them is carefully created to create a point, to support a point. And it's very easy reading in that respect. So yes, kudos to that team for putting together the data, the profound collection of data here on the history of various aspects of investment and adoption and utilization in all domains. So let's get to the closes here. Does anybody have something they'd like to add? I have one that I want to add, but before I do that last one and then bid adieu, who else has something that they want to add?
I think with 340 pages that are all built to have each one to make a point, that means that's 340 points, and we have an opportunity here to really go through all of them if we really want to. So in the community, let us know if you want us to do more episodes on this report. Okay, sorry, I hand it off to you, Andy.
Oh yeah. Anyway, I want to point out the page inflation on this report. I think it's 305. It grew to 321, and then now 340. I'm not sure that really matters. They're all of them too many for even any one of us to have confidently absorbed and be able to report on that without the assistance of others who are aggregating the takeaways from this report. Anyone else with a final point? No? Okay, I have one. Mary Meeker makes I think, plaintive point about the trending isolationism and protectionism in the United States. And she says that the United States must continue attracting the world's brightest AI minds. And this is cautioning against restrictive immigration. To quote her, she says, America has to be a place where the brightest people in the world want to come, like the people who want to go to Harvard. Our tech ecosystem would not be where it is today without a lot of first-generation immigrants. And that reminds me that recently, in the context of the Trump administration's attacks on Harvard, if you look at the top 10 major technology companies in the United States today that create so much of our worldwide dominance in technology infrastructure and development, today now being challenged by China, I think 40% of them are first generation immigrants leading those companies. And what we're trying to do is shut the door on that in a really ill-advised way. Okay. So thank you very much for joining us today. Join us again tomorrow at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern. It's our news roundup show every week. And so Junmi will be guiding us through what's happened in the last 7 days or so. And also, don't forget to check out our community at the Daily AI Show community.com. There you can join a really very interesting group of people who discuss and discourse on a daily basis, even after our show, and comment on our show as well there. It's a Slack community, which makes for really interesting multi-channel engagement. Go check it out, and also sign up at thedailyAIshow.com for our newsletter, which is a really compact thing, comes out every Sunday morning. All right. Thanks for watching, listening. If you're on Spotify, or you can actually watch video on Spotify now too. That's it for today's show, June 3rd. The Daily AI Show is ending, and I'm not sure how to end it. But anyway, it's over to Junmi.
Aloha.